So scalable forms in Vue. How many of you guys spend a majority of your time writing forms? Yeah, most of you. Every time I talk about this, I'm always shocked by what a big problem it actually is in our space. So scalable forms in Vue, let's get right into it. First of all, what do I mean by scalability? That's not necessarily something you would think would apply to forms, but I think it does. In the server context, we're already familiar with the idea of scalability. We use terms like load balancers, horizontal, vertical scaling, like how many servers, things like that. Requests per second might be a metric that we would be tracking if we wanted to know how scalable our backends were. But what does that mean on the front end? On the front end, I think it's a little bit more like how reusable is your code? How big is the organization and the number of people that need to be interacting with your components? How about developers per project? Maybe that's the right metric to track how scalable our forms and our front end in general really is. Evan had an interesting little snippet I clipped out of a podcast recently where he was talking about Vue 2's scalability issues. And he said, Vue 2 has scalability issues. We have a huge Vue product, we have these huge components nobody wants to touch anymore, and we don't know how to extract and reuse these things. And that's sort of what gave rise, at least in some regard, to the composition API. Real quick on me, that's my name, Justin Schroeder, which I believe is actually German. I'm like originally German. Obviously, you can tell from my accent that I am from the US. And these are some of the open source projects that I've created / maintain. So FormKit, Arrow.js, which is sort of like a mini Vue kind of thing. AutoAnimate, Tempo, which is a datetime library. Drag and Drop, which is a drag and drop library. And Vue Formulate, which is the precursor to FormKit. Hopefully none of you are using that anymore. So scalable front ends. Here's my rubric for knowing whether or not we've succeeded at making something scalable. First of all, I think it should enable code reuse, a lot of code reuse. Second, we should encourage best practices. Right? If somebody's going to use my component, they shouldn't be violating any best practices out there. Third, it should be approachable for all skill levels. So, I mean, this is one of the big problems on teams. You have some people that are super senior, some people that aren't. And you need to all be able to kind of work in harmony. And is it conducive to a team of developers? I mean, I know personally I have written many an application that are perfectly fine for just me, but as soon as that gets into a larger group of people, it'll break down. So, oversimplification here, but I think you can roughly divide our front ends into two parts. You have sites and you have applications, okay? Websites, they're content heavy, right? We're talking about like WordPress, things like that. Minimal interactivity, people are going there, they're reading some content, they're reading some documentation, and they have very limited business logic. And on the other hand, with applications, they're highly interactive, tons of logic in them, they do something, and they usually make use of extensive forms. And if you think about it, really, applications are really just like big forms. That's really fundamentally what they do. It doesn't matter if you're ordering pad thai or you're booking a plane ticket, you are interacting with forms. All interactivity on a website fundamentally goes through forms at some level. So what is our plan to tackle the forms? Well, obviously what we should do is use the form data API and use native forms as much as possible. So the benefits here are obvious. It uses the fundamental platform that's built into your browser. There's already native validation in the browser. You're not shipping any extra JavaScript to the front end, and it works theoretically with every server. But Mike Tyson knew that everybody had a plan until they were punched in the mouth. And if you've gone down plan A here, you've been punched in the mouth. You know that often this just doesn't live up to what we expect. For example, you can't structure data using the form data API, not without some strange conventions that you come up with. The native validation rules are very limited, and while there's an API to extend those, now we get into essentially using JavaScript to recreate these things. There's a basic lack of interactivity, right? If I want to be able to have a form where you have 2 items or 3 items, and you have an add more button or something like that, I'm already out of native land. And there's not even a standard body parser, right? I mean, if you ever used Express or something like that and you need to parse the body, there actually is no standard for what that body structure is supposed to be. All right, so plan B. Don't use the form data API. Blasphemy, blasphemy. Instead, let's just use form components. Let's write some components. Now, here's what we need to do. We're going to write a component, and that component is going to be some nice text input or something like that. But we want to make sure we hit these things, right? We want it to be accessible. It needs to have delightful validation, not some sort of janky UX. It needs props for customization. And of course, we're in Vue, so we want to support vModel to structure the data. Now, you have almost certainly written this component. I can guarantee you, almost every Vue developer at some point has been like, I'm going to simplify my form life process, and you've written this component. But we're going to do it again together here. All right, here we go. Let's take a look here. We've got a define model, lovely, in Vue here. And deep down inside of here, you can see we're using our model, we're vModeling our values so they can get from inside our text input back outside. We're doing things like using nice accessible labels with a for and an ID, hopefully a unique ID, which is linked to the input. We're even doing really nice stuff like having help text on there, which will then be linked with an aria described by. So we've done a good job, I think. Now let's reuse our text input. So here we are in our app.vue file. And you can see we've got some form data. You guys done this before? I hope so. Form data. Down here, we're going to vModel our form data. In this case, we're going to cheat, and we're just going to do it on a subproperty. And here we've got some Tailwind classes, because ultimately we need to style this component. And down here, we've got some errors that need to get produced somewhere and piped in here. We haven't even talked about that yet. And it works, right? If you think about it, we have now achieved these. We've definitely enabled code reuse. You can reuse the text input. We are encouraging best practices because now the accessibility is baked into our component. It is approachable for all skill levels because everybody can just quickly grab our text component and use it. And in theory, this would mean it's conducive to a team of developers. But let's take a look at code reuse first. All right, so here's our text input. Now we're just going to use it. So we're going to use our text input. And we'll get rid of all the classes. That just makes it too confusing. So here is user.view. This is going to be a component which is supposed to collect user details. We can use it throughout our application. Anywhere we're going to collect user details, we're going to use this user.view file. And we have two text inputs in it, right? We've got a first name and we've got a last name. Perfect. It's not really perfect. Eagle eye observers here, right? Okay, so now we've got a bunch of data that we need to get into our component to then get into our text inputs, right? We call this prop drilling. Okay, so let's step back. We're now in app.vue, and now we're going to use our user component. Well, now we're going to need two vModels, a first name and a last name. We're going to need to get some errors for each of those inputs. Whatever's generating our validation errors or something, they need to pipe those inside. And in reality, it's going to look something a little bit more like this, because ultimately we're going to be tracking all kinds of stuff about it. What are the initial values that are supposed to be in there? What is our focus state, our input states? There's going to be a lot of information. We need unique identifiers to be able to get all of our IDs and attributes and for things done properly, especially with SSR. There's a lot of work that's going to go into making this actually work. And it starts to bring into question if we've actually enabled any good code reuse, or if we've enabled any good practices ultimately, because I would argue that we're going to make a lot of mistakes here. It's definitely not going to be beneficial for all skill levels, and it's not conducive to a team of developers. And if you've done this, which I assume many of you have, you've kind of probably gone through this process where you've seen things start to fall apart. So I'm going to argue that components are not enough. Native was not enough. Components are not enough. What else can there be? Well, forms are hard, and the components really only solved a small subset of the main problems. I would argue that most of the rest of this is not well solved by components. We need something else. So what's the solution? I'm going to argue to you today, and afterwards if you come up and talk to me, that what we really need are dedicated form trees. So this is the same structure that we just had. We have our form with our user component and then two text components inside and all of the DOM elements. We could diagram this in another way, very simply. Here is our form, our text inputs, and then all of those DOM elements, right? But what actually matters in this tree? Well, what actually matters is the inputs that belong to the form. That's actually all that matters. All the rest of it is kind of like, doesn't matter. And interestingly, native HTML got this right all the way back in 1995. If you grab your form, you can automatically read all of the inputs that are in your form. It doesn't matter how deep they are. It doesn't matter how many components they're nested deep, how many DOM elements they're nested. They somehow magically bubble up to the form. It's pretty amazing. Unfortunately, this was in 1995, and that was in 1995. We don't think that's cool anymore, but somehow we're still using this same structure. So, what are some of the problems? Well, like we said, you can't structure the data. It doesn't do any state tracking for you whatsoever. Like, it sort of knows the values if you check them, but it doesn't do any state tracking. The form data keys themselves are not unique. Like, you can have 2 names inside of a form, and it's supposed to just somehow rectify itself. That's up to you. That's why there's no standard body parser. You can't do things like rehydrate the form. Like, you can't give the form the initial values and have those go into your form. I have literally gotten bug reports about native validation that there was a bug. It wasn't a bug. It was that the native validation UX was so poor that the users thought that there was a bug on the website because the validation like popped up in this weird window and they thought it was a bug. You can't transport backend errors. If you get backend errors, we need to get our logic little fingers all the way down in there in order to put the backend errors on there. So what do we all do? We just cheat, right? And we just put a big block of backend errors somewhere on the page and say, here's the backend errors, you figure it out, user. Well, we all know we should probably take those backend errors and put them on the inputs that are offending, right? And then have a summary somewhere. But we don't do it because it's too much work. So the web is missing some form primitives. Let's take a password for an example. Simple password input. And inside of this password input is inside of a form. And we already discussed that that password needs to be able to give its value to the form. But sometimes the form needs to give a value to the password, right? Like, let's say it's a change password input or something like that. I guess password would be a bad example in that case because you wouldn't want to do that. But imagine you needed to do that, okay? How about a confirm password? Well, now we have added an additional layer of complexity. Yes, the confirm password also needs to give its value to the form, and the form may need to give a value back to there, or validation errors or backend errors. But also, these 2 inputs now need to communicate with each other somehow. Interesting. Now, what if we just nest this one layer deeper? Now we're gonna have some object called like account details that's inside of the form. And now these need to give their values up to the form and receive their values. You've done this probably by having some object where you're like v-modeling a bunch of stuff on a subproperty. Now, what if that account is actually just one of many, right? You're managing many, and now we've got this array of accounts. And all of these need to be able to give their values and even communicate with each other. Maybe they need to make sure that the usernames are unique within a large set. So we're missing the primitives in native HTML to describe this. Things like groups or objects, a group of fields, right? Things like a list, basically an array. We don't have that kind of concept in native HTML. And just basic inputs, that's the one thing we do have. So in FormKit, which is the open source library that I wrote, we decided to solve the componenty things with components, which is why FormKit ships components. We want to be able to have accessibility out of the box. But this other stuff, I should say, yes, we ship all of these, every single native input that exists is already done in FormKit, so you can use them very easily. And then we've done a few extras. That's like our little paid solution. But all of the rest of this is the tree architecture. So let's see how we would rewrite this if we were using something like FormKit. Well, we would put FormKit type form around it, and then the user would just be the component user. We wouldn't do any other binding at all, none. The user component would then look like this. I have a first name and I have a last name. There's no prop drilling. Notice that we don't have any models. We're not picking up data from outside and then re-drilling it down. These 2 things automatically communicate with each other. And then When you want to submit the data, you just add a submit handler. So let's write a quick one here. Handle submit. And that data object that we get is going to automatically have the values from our form inside of it. Now, what if I wanted to be a little bit more structured? I wanted to have something like a user object with my first name and last name. Well, that would look like what we just talked about, a group. So here I've got type group, name user, and that name is the key of the property under which these things get grouped. Notice that we didn't change anything about the way that our user is actually defined. We didn't have to add anything to it or subtract anything to it. That means we can just reuse this anytime we want to reuse it in our application. Anytime we want to reference user data, we can automatically do this. We don't need to prop drill. How about validation? Yes, let's put validation on there. Okay, so now you can just add validation to the inputs that need them. You could even write it like this, where you automatically apply a configuration to all of the sub-inputs. And the thing about this is that my form, even at the very top level, is able to track the validity state of everything inside of it, even a subtree. So how does this roughly translate to that tree architecture? Well, here you can see we've got the form on the outside, and then we've got this user. But the user is effectively transparent. Just like all those DOM elements are transparent in native HTML, the user component really doesn't matter. It's not important. You could have that nested 30 layers deep. It's not important. Then we have this group that's on the outside. Now, what if I wanted to add a new input? Maybe this is VIF'd in there or something like that. OK, so a FormKit type number. That automatically creates a new branch in our tree. How about something like an array? Well, in this case, I would do a list, and I'd have 2 items underneath it. These would also automatically self-assemble. And just like native HTML, except now you have the ability to do much more complex structure. OK, how much time I got? I got a little bit of time here. So I'm going to try to do some live demoing. Let's all pray to the demo gods. So I'm going to try. I have not actually done this, so we'll find out if this works. This is the order form. I don't read German. Zimmerfrühstück. Huh? Yeah? Is that good? Probably not. All right, room breakfast. It's the like breakfast order form in our rooms. And I'm going to try to convert this. Maybe this would be a task comes on your plate. You've got to convert this. So I'm going to do this. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say import. We're going to take a photo. OK. And here's my camera. I'm going to take a picture of this, hopefully. All right, use photo. Here we go. There's my order form. So all of you, if you stayed in this hotel, should have something like this. And it's got some time slots. It has a room number, a date when we're ordering, number of guests, a bunch of other things, like I guess what you're going to order. So I'm going to use another tool we wrote, which is available, of course, to the Kickstart ecosystem. And I'm going to pick my image here. And I'm going to go ahead and try to generate it. Hopefully this works. Hey, that's pretty good. All right, let's see. We got room number, date, number of guests, all the time slots, breakfast variations. Nice. OK. I'm happy about that. So let's go ahead and actually turn this into a FormKit project. So this is a tool called Kickstart. You can visit at kickstart.formkit.com. It will automatically generate the components for you. So here's the code for my form. You can see all the options are in there. Everything's in there. If you want to edit it, you can manually edit it. And FormKit also ships with first-class support for JSON schema. Not the JSON schema. It's our own proprietary format, and we did that because we need to do things like deeply nested conditionals and all kinds of other stuff. So this is geared specifically for forms. But here you can see this would be the JSON equivalent. I could shove that in a database and then use it elsewhere. But I'm going to go ahead and just copy these components. And then we are going to do something extremely risky and try to actually create a project with this. All right, so I'm going to do npx. Actually, I'm going to go to my desktop. We'll make sure we use the latest copy. Create app. Sure. We'll use Nuxt. FormKit Pro, yeah, so some of our components are Pro. I'm going to go ahead and do that. OK. Let's see, I'm going to use my library. We'll create here Vue.js.de. I prefer PNPM. How many people use PNPM? Nice, wow, OK. No Git repository. OK. NI, if you guys don't know NI, that's an Ant food tool, which is great. It like picks whichever package, like if you're using PNPM or NPM, it automatically does it. OK. I've recently switched to Cursor. You got any Cursor users? Some? One. Wow, OK. Well, I don't know what to say about that. In the States, it's all the rage, so. All right, so here is our app. I'm just going to make sure that my modules are on here. Let's see, oh, hey, look at that, I got it right. And I already installed. OK, uh-oh. Oh, it's not Nuxt FormKit. Bad AI, bad. I'll talk to Daniel about getting that namespace. All right. So yeah, let's go ahead and now get our code in here. So here's a boilerplate. I am going to remove all of this boilerplate component stuff out of here and paste in, oh, that was not the right thing. OK. Here we go. Copy this code. Paste that in there. Let's see, did that come with its own form? It did. Let's get rid of that. We already have a form. And we'll say actions false. That gets rid of the button. By default, it automatically comes with a button. OK. Cool. I think that's right. All right, I can't really tell because I don't have Prettier, so let's install that. Oh, that's what I want. That's a weird place to be at. Oh, it's mad at me. Let's see. I've got a form. I think I have one too many closing tags or something like that. Yep. Let's move this up here, get rid of this. Hey. All right, let's take a look now. 3,000. Oh no. What did I do? Anybody know? There's a W? In my package JSON, there's a W? I did an undo. All right, hold on. What have I done? One of you knows because you've been watching me, but I can't hear you. Yes. That looks fine. Over here I did something bad. Nuxt.js tailwind, that looks fine. That looks fine. This submit is unhappy. Whoa. Whoa. I typed a W in a file. In the view, and you're saying the view? This guy? This guy? Wow. Amazing. Amazing. An entire room of people, and we figured it out. All we needed was Daniel. Okay, now I undid all my changes. So I'm going to do this again. I'm just going to get rid of all that. All right. Hey, there's our form. Amazing. We got through that. That was a stressful moment. We got through it. All right. So a couple examples here of what we're doing. So I could, for example, get my value here. I'm just destructuring the default slot here. And I'm going to get the value of my entire form. It's very ugly, but you can see this is working. Okay, so all of the information from my form here is automatically flowing to this little guy. Now, the reason that this matters is that I could start to break this apart. So I could decide, for example, that I want to create a component in here. Let's call this components, I don't know, personal info. All right, yell at me if I make another mistake, everybody. All right, so, and now I am going to go ahead and just take the first few of these, right? So like the room number, the date, number of guests, I'm gonna go ahead and just cut those out of here. And I'm going to shove them over here in some component called personal info. I'm not going to do anything else. I just hit a tab. Nobody said anything. OK, I'm not going to do anything else, and then I'm just going to use it, personal info here. And what I would expect is like nothing to change in my form, the styling change, but nothing changed, and the values would still flow exactly where they are supposed to go, including the validation state of my form. If I do something like a pre-tag in here, and we'll just add some, yeah, sure, call span 2, and then I'm going to grab that value again. This is actually value. OK, so here you can see that all of these values are still going to flow to the correct location, even though I've started to nest them. So when we go back and we talk about scalability for a form, this is the kind of thing that we're talking about. Now, if I want to then say, OK, well, perhaps somebody should be able to order multiple things, we could say that this is now a repeater. And now I'll take all of the food items that somebody's going to order, and all the way down to, let's see, enter your name, email right there. Oh, that's ugly. Let's call span 2 that. Ah! Okay. Now you can see I could make multiple orders. I'm going to do this at 9 o'clock with hot milk, but I'm also going to do hot chocolate at 9:30 to 10, also with hot milk and cold milk. And all of my data up here, you'll see, will have flown into, I didn't give my repeater a name, but I have now an array of multiple orders. And I didn't have to do any additional wiring or V-modeling or structuring for that because the tree self-assembled itself. So that is a brief look at how that works. Jump back in here, and I think we're about to wrap up. So fundamentally, we were able to enable code reuse because of that distinct form tree. We were able to use components, which encourages a lot of best practices because you can bake your best practices into your components. It's approachable, and this is actually one of the best benefits, is you get standardization across your team. Now, this is true whether or not you're using FormKit or any of the other great UI kind of libraries that have been mentioned here today. It's really important to have consistency across your projects. And it's definitely conducive to a team of developers because of that. Now, one of the reasons that we actually chose, you'll notice that everything is FormKit in our app, and that is intended purely as a squishy brain signal to you to know which API you're dealing with at what point, right? So it could be confusing to be like, well, how is this value deep down inside of my component tree getting communicated up? But when you see FormKit on there, you know automatically that that's how that works. And that is me. You can follow me on a couple different places. So that's it on X. These, again, are the libraries. FormKit actually is doing a sale where we normally FormKit Pro, so it's an open source project, but the Pro one has paid components. Normally, you do that per project, but we are doing this like short thing during the month of October where you can have like all of our components forever, for life, infinite projects, so on and so forth. With this unlimited sale. We've only done that once before. But if you have any questions, please come and let me know. Thank you very much.